were having a conversation and got excited about the top of the hour and started a few seconds late, so we apologize for that. This is part of the 2017 Crisis Coach webinar series sponsored by the New Jersey MEP, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and hopefully we'll have some others that will join us as we move forward. The title today is Stop. You're saying the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong people the wrong way. And as we talk about crises, we see a lot of times where those areas come into the communications, and that's going to be consistent with the theme we talk about today, and hopefully tell you some things that you haven't thought about before as we look at each of these topics. There is a hashtag today. It's hashtag Crisis Coach. You can join us on Twitter at Firestorm Soul or Facebook, Firestorm Solutions. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We empower you to manage risk and crises, and our expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We're always balancing this area between risk and crisis, and how you handle it, how you identify it, and what you say makes a big difference. We are America's crisis coach, and I think that's the reason we're talking today, and we follow a Predict.Plan.Perform methodology. There is a disclaimer. Everybody's got attorneys. We've got ours, and they say, hey, you need the oral comments here to complete the presentation. You must use this in conjunction with your national, regional, and local authorities, and check with your organization's personal counsel, and don't interpret what we're doing today as legal advice. Attorneys hate it when we say we're giving legal advice. We're welcome today to have Joe from the New Jersey MEP. So Joe, tell us a little bit about the MEP and what's going on.
Yeah, sure, Jim. For those that are not familiar, New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program, our focus is basically working with manufacturers in New Jersey to help them become more productive, more profitable, and more globally competitive. And we do it through a number of different services that we provide. We help companies with managing energy costs, helping them take advantage of R&D tax credits. We do a lot of training in different areas like lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, strategic planning. We also help companies with growth services and innovation to help them expand their business, in addition to assisting companies with things like compliance for ISO certification, FDA regulation, food regulations, and of course business continuity planning, which brings us to today's topic of you're always saying the wrong thing. And that's true of me at parties, Jim. Is this going to help me at all at parties?
I think it's always also true whenever we talk to our spouses that we invariably will find a way to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, the wrong way. I know I've been corrected. Probably, Joe, you're much smarter than I am and haven't fallen into that trap. Okay, so let's continue that topic. Joe, unless you've got any last comments you want to say on that.
No, that's it. Let's move ahead.
All right, so we'll do that, and we've got a lot of things to talk about, and we really appreciate that this webinar series is underwritten by the New Jersey MEP, and that has been in place now for a number of years, and I think it's important that we've got to continue to grow and build in our jobs. There's an educational requirement that we all see and must meet on a regular basis. My name's Jim Satterfield. I'm the President and CEO of Firestorm, and glad to be speaking with you today. And as we try to share different people within our team, providing insights that you can use. You see repeated here down below, you're saying the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong way to the wrong people. Those are a common theme. You probably turned on the television set or watched something on the internet or read it in the newspaper and say, boy, they're going to wish they didn't say that. And that's what we want to think about. I also would like to take you back to school where you were learning to write, and they talked about you need to write and tell people what's happening, when it's happening, who's involved, where it is. All of those 5 W's need to come into play, and that's all true, except it depends on who your stakeholder is, what you're saying, and when you're saying it. And we're going to go into that area in a much greater depth today as we talk about crisis communications and when you should say things and what you should be talking about to each of those stakeholder groups. Now, as background, we, as you know, do webinars on a regular basis, and we're doing surveys, and we did a survey of organizations and saying, hey, what's your biggest concern at this point in time? And I don't think that there's a startling revelation on the chart that's running across a cyber attack, and we've seen all the ransomware attacks that have occurred this year and continue to occur. We see the breaches that are happening in organizations. Natural disasters, we're in summer season. It's only a matter of time before hurricanes are starting and earthquakes, and we've certainly seen the wildfires out west and tornadoes coming through and making a big difference. Certainly a concern element. Violence, we've been asking groups, do you think violence in America is increasing or decreasing? And unanimously, every audience has said increasing. And so as we look at that, whether we're a business or a school, violence is a significant threat for us today. Brand and reputation, if I said United Airlines, we would all immediately think of that doctor being drugged down the aisle. Terrorist attack, unfortunately, when we look at the events in the UK and what we've been seeing there with the attacks, I believe we're going to see those same types of events here in America. And we all can remember exactly where we were on 9/11 and the impact in areas. And I guess you could summarize all of these with any loss of life event. I could understand why those are the concerns that you would have for your organization. And depending upon the orientation, you might shift around. But I think this is a pretty good template. What we did find also in that same survey was something that disturbed us greatly. And for those crisis events, our organization has created a complete all-hazard message map. And only 14% of you had indicated, yeah, we know what we're going to say if that happens. By the way, that means that 86% of you are unsure or don't have a plan of what you would say. If you know what your biggest exposure and risk is, why don't we sit down and start to say, what will we be telling our employees? What will we be telling our students? What will we be telling our customers or clients or our vendors or the public in general or our regulators that are involved? It's easier to edit than it is to create. So planning these messages out in advance, having them link back. Now, we have found and talk about the 5 common failures and disasters in crisis. And one of those failures is the failure to have a crisis communications plan. And you look at this, this would tell us that 86% of the organizations, that 1,000 that we talked about, aren't ready to be able to respond. And so why are we surprised then suddenly when the CEO or leader of the organization comes out with a statement that we're going, ooh, not so good? Well, let's think about this a little bit more. How much time do we have? Well, we're in an instant media market today. I can hold a press conference with my 1 million closest friends by pushing something out to the internet and get that information out. So we have no time. It's instant. It's immediate. And so we must identify the threats beforehand and before they become a crisis. The exposures that each one of you have are different. Now, you share some common exposures. If you're in a geographic area and you're Florida, we'd be thinking about hurricanes. But as we look in the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania area, winter storms, you have had tornadoes. A few years ago, Hurricane Sandy came up. If you're in a manufacturing area, you're going to have supply chain issues and problems. That's a normal set of an area. But how that profile breaks out for your organization is unique. Open source intelligence can be designed to see if your risk is about to happen. Now, that's another one of the common failures. It's the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. So now we're saying, hey, there's no crisis communications plan, and we're not doing the monitoring to know that that risk is about to occur. So it's not just a Google search. It's a much more formal structure because your leadership wants to know about it before it escalates, before it becomes a problem. I often tell everybody that the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 and it was my birthday. If you're at work and there's a surprise, it's not good. Now, in a crisis, there's a visibility vulnerability. And if you look at this, we've asked, are you ready to measure your visibility in a crisis? And about a third of you said, yeah, we can do it. Just under a third said, nope, not measuring that. And a little over a third said, what are you talking about? You want to know what is your visibility in that crisis that's going on. What are people saying about you? Who are the brand supporters? Who are the brand detractors? And you want to be seeing if your messages are being understood and communicated in the way that you look. How you respond to the crisis that you're in may well create a second crisis, and that'll be significantly worse. Now, in an earthquake area, if you've had an earthquake and then there's an aftershock, there's another law and a rule of interpretation that that's going to be 1.4 less on the Richter scale. So if you had a 4.0, then the aftershock shouldn't go over 2.6. But I will tell you, from a visibility vulnerability in a crisis, the aftershock could be significantly worse than the first crisis that you were dealing with. The idea that they had to take somebody off a plane to put an employee into their seat, and they did it that way, was okay. That's not good. But what they said about it, and when those visual pictures went out of him being drugged down and the blood was going down his face, that secondary crisis was significantly worse. And that's what I want you to all think about today as we're talking about it. So when we talk about open source intelligence, there's information that's out there. Now, there are a couple of statistics here that work to your advantage. One is that 80% of the time, if someone has ill intent, somebody else knows, and 67% of the time, 2 or more people know. And when they know, what do? They talk. And where do they talk? They talk on social media. That's that social chatter that you're seeing out there. So looking at what you're needing to be aware of will assist you in designing your communications. I'm reminded of a story from one of our expert council members, Ken Burris. Ken used to be Chief Operating Officer of FEMA, and he was President and CEO of another large consulting organization. And they had a client who had a pollution event in a seaside area. And so they immediately, when the breach of the pollution was made, they were scrambling, saying, oh, we've got to come out with a statement saying there's not an what the environmental impact is, and we've got to go on about all of these things. And so they stopped and looked to see what were people saying about this pollution event. And they found out that people weren't concerned about the environment. They were concerned about, could they go to the beach today? And sure enough, this pollution event went down onto the beach, but stopped just short of the water, and there was only a 50-foot wide section of the beach that was at all impaired. So they came out and made announcements that the beach was open. You can go to the beach today. In fact, we're going to be down there with soft drinks and hot dogs. Come on down to the beach. Not a problem. And had they gone out with a message about the pollution, then there would have been environmentalists and all types of other areas. So knowing what the conversation is about before you speak is what's needed. How many times have you answered a question that was not asked, and that in turn opened up and created another problem? So understanding what's out there becomes extremely important, and having open source intelligence as a key element of your crisis management and crisis communications plan is a key building block. Let's delve into it a little bit more, and as we're talking about stages of escalation. So if we're going to be looking at what's being said, we're always at least at a guarded level. We've identified the risks that we are concerned about. We're monitoring to see if there's anything we hear on it. And it's just kind of a predictive, wait a minute, this is about to happen, and getting that intelligence coming into play. Now, once we see that tripwire hit, we're at an elevated level. We're looking a little closer. We're trying to zero in on what's happening, because we've seen now that what we were concerned about is starting to occur. And then the third level is that it's imminent. We're seeing that this thing could escalate and become a big problem. The facts are not going in our favor, and the monitoring is continuing. And then finally, it rises to a targeted active threat. Now, this would be true whether we're talking about cyber breach, workplace violence, weather events, supply chain disruption. Now we're doing a much more detailed because it's occurring, it's severe, and we can look at all of the interactions around it. If you put those together, this kind of lays out the escalations that happen with the open source intelligence and the monitoring. And can you imagine that your communications in each one of those stages is different? What we talk about in a guarded level where nothing has happened is business as usual, and we'd be announcing our programs. What we'd be talking about in severe would be focused specifically around those things. Imagine how it would look, and we see this regularly. There were planned communications going out, and then all of a sudden there was a disaster, and the routine, normal communications were conducted, and that caused a massive reaction against the company. So suddenly, if there was a flood, and you were a retailer and you started to say, and we're running a special this week on boats or paddles, it could have a negative connotation immediately at that point in time. It's also probably not the time to be talking about the gun sale in the middle of an active shooter event. So responding in each stage is a function of knowing what's going on in each stage and then going through the Predict.Plan.Perform methodology of what you see happening at the next. So let's look at some of the actions in a crisis, particularly from an initial perspective of what you need to focus and where you need to go. And looking at that, you'll see a list here in 2 columns, and there are a lot of things you've got to do. And if you stop and say, wait a minute, Jim, some of those are in bold. Why are those bolded? Everything that's bolded has to do with communications. It's some factor associated with it. And you'll notice that over half of the actions relate to communications, and that's the reason why we're so concerned about what we're going to say, who we're going to say it to, when we're going to say it, how we're going to say it, and the medium that's going to come into play. So there's some misconceptions, and let's start to bring them up. And we have a nice audience here that has some different observations about what's going on. And by the way, everything you're seeing from our faceless folks there are things that we've heard. If we don't make a statement, they'll think we have something to hide. There's going to be someone on your board or in your leadership team that's saying, hey, we've got to be talking about this right now. Look at the second. We have to get out in front of this and frame that issue. Our CEO wants to call a press conference. She says she can wing it. Winging it is never good. Think about all the statements that you've seen in these crises and areas. So in each of these areas, there's a pressure to communicate because something has in fact happened. So it's a misconception that if we just say something, it's going to go away. What I'm going to tell you is it's not going to go away. It's going to remain, and it's going to be a problem and will escalate if we don't handle our actions appropriately. Now, when you think about your business and your organization, you've got frameworks and policies and procedures of how you're going to operate. And a business continuity buzzword at this point would be a thing called resiliency and what are our plans. But you know how to run your organization. You've got a proven business model. There's a formula that works to make it profitable, to make that event happen the way that you want it to occur. But what happens if something goes wrong and there's a crisis? One of the things that we've learned all along is if you're explaining in a crisis, you're losing. Is there an explanation why this happened? And so we get truths and lies and statements get all confused around. But you know what? This problem isn't going to go away. And there's no one magic sentence. If we only say these things, it's not going to happen. So we'll talk about that in a minute, and I'll give you a rule that I think will help a great deal there. But we tell common criminals, if they've committed a crime and they're being arrested by the police through the Miranda warning, that they have the right to remain silent. Well, you know what? In a crisis, you have the right to remain silent also. And we'll talk about that theme more today and in coming webinars and training sessions that we're doing. But take to heart that if you're explaining about this crisis, you're losing because you're talking about the wrong things to the wrong people at the wrong time. So wait a minute, somebody wants us to talk. They're on our board. What do we do? Well, we have a rule of 5. When you've been asked to communicate, we want you to stop and say, why? And listen to the answer. They'll give you an answer, and then you say, why? And they'll answer that question. And then you do it again until you've done it 5 times. If you've asked 5 whys through that process and all the answers make sense to you, you should be communicating right now. What I will tell you is somewhere around the 3rd why, it's going to fall apart. They won't have a reason that they can answer to talk about those things. Now remember, in many of these events, you cannot talk at all. You can't share personal health information or HIPAA-related areas. You can't, if you're a school, you can't talk to someone about someone else's child. You can only talk with their parents about them. So there are confidentiality issues that you cannot breach and talk. There are things that you don't know. You've heard us tell you that almost everything you learn initially in a crisis is wrong. And what's the impact if you have your senior leadership out giving wrong information? You're going to lose credibility. It's going to be very tough for you to regain it. It's going to be a difficult scenario for you. So as we look at these things, let's use this tool as a way to start to make a difference. Okay, we've decided that we need to communicate. We've gone through the rule of 5. Let's talk about the 3 C's of crisis communications. The first is coordination, and that's a common one, and that's one that we do need to do in every crisis. And we're talking about things like shelter in place, lockout, lockdown, and evacuate. We want our people to know what to do to minimize the exposure. So that coordination is generally around environmental health and safety issues of what you want your people to do in the crisis. That'll be the very first communication that goes out. It needs to be very simple, and it needs to avoid buzzwords. We're not going to say we're having a code orange. We're going to tell people you need to stay in the building, you need to go out of the building. What is it that we want them to do? It's a coordination communication. The second type is one that will generally happen 24 hours or more later, and it's around the crisis. It's the brand and reputation issues that you're going to be dealing with. Since almost everything you're learning initially is wrong, then you know what, you should think about what you're going to say, verify your facts, then you'd be in a better position to talk. That's not an area that you want to try to get out with in that immediate first area, because you're going to find that communications is wrong. The last type of crisis communications is compliance. We have many requirements. Obviously, if you've had a cyber breach, you have to notify someone that their identity's been stolen. By the way, PII has different definitions depending upon the city that you're in, the state you're in. There are probably 38 different definitions of personally identifiable information. But it also varies in requirements for us, because if you're, say, in a school, if you have knowledge or belief that a child is at risk, you're a mandated reporter. You have to notify family services in your state and carry that out. Or if you're aware that someone is about to commit a crime that could have an impact, that's why we need to notify the police. So there are notifications that have to happen from a compliance standpoint. So those have a later time frame generally, particularly if we're talking about things like a cyber breach. The laws are written so that you have to notify within, quote, a reasonable amount of time. So, okay, I get that. Let's talk about how we do this. Well, if we're focused with communications, we have to be focused in a decision process. What's our process that we're going to go through to figure those things out? The first step in following the Predict.Plan.Perform methodology is, who is the audience? What are their concerns? Remember the story about the beach earlier? That's a pretty big difference of what you're communicating about. And if you're just concerned about people in a particular area, you want their communications to go that way. Now, you could have had a disaster or a crisis, and you may be telling the employees one thing, the shareholders something else, the vendors and the customers something else. Vendors are going to be concerned about where's my order, when am I going to get it? If you're a school and there's an event, is my child safe going to become the big publication that you're going to have to focus on? So knowing the audience and knowing their concerns becomes absolutely critical. Now, once we've gotten the audience and their concerns down, then we can plan what we're going to talk. We want to tailor the message, the messenger, and the media or medium to that individual group and format it to the stakeholder. You know, what I would tell a second grader is different than what I would tell a high school senior. How I would carry that message out. We all remember the loss of the airplane in Indonesia a couple of years ago, and the families were notified via text message that their loved one had died. What a horrible thing to have happen. Why wouldn't that have been done in a much more direct and one-on-one type of an area? So we tailor what we're going to say, we tailor who is going to say it, and we're going to tailor how we say it. Is it a posting on our website? Is it a phone call? Is it a face-to-face meeting? Is it a press release? Is it a letter? What are we going to do in each of those areas? And are formatting it to the stakeholder. There'll be some slight nuances that will be the same, but having that area will make a difference. And then finally, we focus on 3 key messages. No one's going to remember 47 points of what's going on. At most, you're going to get a chance to hear the 3 key points that we want you to understand. Now, we do a process that we recommend here called message mapping. What is the question? Who is the audience? What is the impact? What's the first thing you're going to say, the second, and the third, and what's the medium you're going to use? So if you look at your risk that you've identified, your vulnerability risk assessment, and you look at the types of things that can happen, and you can identify what questions people might have, if you start to lay out these message maps, then it's a matter of pulling that content up at the time you need it most to be ready to make a difference. So those are the elements that we see happening here and will give you the optimum response. So we've talked a lot about this, and this is as you see things going out, but you know, sometimes things don't go the way you want to, and we've noticed that in this picture, it looks like that road's closed down. You're going to have to take a different way to get that information out to people. So if your systems are down, you're not going to be able to do a blast email out. And so what are your alternatives? What's the way that we can do? Or if we say the wrong thing, then people are going to stop listening to us. So this whole concept of within every crisis, there's kind of a GPS model to figure out which way we go. And so if we make good decisions, then we're going to get to where we want to be, when we want to be there with the types of results. Okay, well, that's confusing. How do I know how bad this is? And that leads us to looking and creating a crisis index, understanding how does this crisis compare to that crisis, because what your 5-year-old may feel as a crisis and what your 16-year-old feels as a crisis and your spouse feels as a crisis probably vary greatly at home, but similarly very greatly at work. So when we're trying to do this, we recommend following the OFF concept here, what seems, and we want you to focus on 3 different concepts, and I think you can do this fairly directly, and we can take virtually anyone where they can grasp it. First, let's look at the outrage. Second, the fault, and the fear. When we talk about outrage, we're thinking about something that's shocking, offensive, despicable, shameful, crazy, beyond belief, extreme. So if there's outrage, that's going to cause outrage if it's those types of modifiers. Fault, is there responsibility? Are we culpable here? Is there accountability? Is there liability as a result? That's about fault. Is there fear? Panic, alarm, terror, dread, anxiety, horror, concern. That means, wait a minute, something could happen to my child. I'm concerned about that. So you can then start to create your own index related to the crisis event that you're in. Let's give you an example. I think we're all familiar with the Flint, Michigan water crisis that happened. People were turning on their taps and the water was coming out brown and it was contaminated and polluted and there were health issues and people were getting sick. And was there outrage about it? Undoubtedly. It was at a severe level. I mean, it's ridiculous. We all are used to being able to turn on our water, and we're expecting that water to be safe to take a bath in or to cook in or wash our clothes in. Was there fault? Yeah, it was severe too here, because it appears that the water department knew about it and elected officials knew about it. It had been reported and they tried to hide it and cover it, and there were criminal charges brought here. So we got outrage, we got fault. And then finally, fear. Was there fear? Oh yeah, my child could develop cancer. There could be birth defects associated with it. It could kill someone. There could be mental issues as a result of these elements. There's ongoing fear. This thing is not over, and it's reaching out. So if you rated that as a 5 in each of those categories under the severe, then look at your event that you're dealing with. Is there outrage about it? Having a tornado hit, probably not outrage unless you didn't have the building prepared or notify your people. Is there fault? Well, we built the building as good as we could. I don't know that there would be fault, but if you were aware and didn't alert, then there could be fault. And was there fear? Well, until they see their loved one, there will be fear, but beyond that, it's over and done. So that crisis, while terrific and horrible from a management standpoint, would be treated differently than the other. Now, you'll notice that when we look at it, we talk in terms of reach, context, and acceleration. Reach is volume, tone, and source of communications. Context is significant, magnitude, and extent of impact, and acceleration is the rate and change in volume. Is this thing escalating or is it de-escalating? And what we can find is that there are waves in these areas depending upon supporting events. If there had been a violent act and there was an arrest or an arraignment, then those elements would come out, and you could spot each one of those points as a way to continue to accelerate it. So now, if you've seen about this, let's talk about how we are structured within our organization. So we also asked, do you have a documented and trained team and tested crisis management plan? Great news, half of you do. That's a wonderful beginning, and we're excited about that, but that means that half don't. Only certain elements are there and in place. And I was in a discussion today with a financial institution, and we were talking about how they their crisis management team performed in a tabletop, and it didn't perform as well as they had hoped. So there's a difference between having the plan, having it trained, having it tested. They had the plan, they hadn't trained on it, they hadn't tested it. And so the good news is it happened in a test environment instead of a live event. But if you look at this, 24%, 1/4 of you don't have any of it, not even a portion of it. So why are we surprised when there's a negative outcome associated with it? Now, anytime there's a crisis event, we look at that and we use this maturity model, the Firestorm Crisis Management Performance Maturity Model, to evaluate how did we do in this crisis. If you look at the dimensions along the left-hand column, the decision process, the roles and responsibilities, the information clarity, the speed of decision-making, the communications effectiveness, you start to get a feel for what we're about and what's occurring in that environment. And so as you read across in this, an organization can evaluate how they're doing in a crisis or even how you're doing in a test exercise. And you move from a surprise and liability in stage 1 all the way over to a stage 4 where it's strategic and part of your culture. Clearly, that's the ultimate goal. But if you look at decision process developed as a reaction to the situation, lots of debate on the process, experts called in late. You know what? They probably aren't going to do so well. Look at roles and responsibilities. That second box over. Roles and responsibilities are clear but defined as needed. Support resources not defined, most issues covered. But some aren't, so now there's an exposure factor there. Information clarity in the third box. Over tells us that basic data is predefined, event information quickly identified, fast organization response for data and input. You know what? From an information clarity standpoint, this organization is going to do better. Now we're going to think about speed of decision making. Look at a a strategic one in that fourth box. Highly efficient and timely decision process, anticipates events and needs, consumes only resources needed. Their performance and metrics and outcome will become much better. And then finally, communications effectiveness. You will know that there is a communications factor in 40% of these items: information clarity and communications effectiveness. The decision process, the roles and responsibilities and speed of decisions actually has some communications elements embedded in them, and that's an important activity. So when we think about crisis management, crisis communications is extremely important. I also want to illustrate for you the breakthroughs that happen. When you move from a stage 1 up to a stage 2, that's a control breakthrough. You're starting to get things under control. When you move to a stage 3, then you've had an alignment program breakthrough. It's starting to align with what you need to have done. And then finally, when it hits the top level, that's a value breakthrough. That's a significant change associated with it. Now, if you're evaluating your organization in a crisis or an exercise, whatever you scored lowest in is the rating. So if you were 1 in one section and a 2 and a 3 in others, you're still a 1. Because if you made the wrong decisions, that's not going to help us. If they're not clearly defined roles and responsibilities, you've got the wrong people doing the wrong things. If the information isn't clear, how can you perform? If you hadn't made a good decision, but you made the decision too late, it's not going to be anything that's you can use. And then finally, if you don't communicate effectively, no one is going to understand. So I want to continue back with a thought that I raised a minute ago about you have the right to remain silent. And we're coming in with a program called the Crisis Miranda Warning. And I think when you look at this, that remaining silent, particularly in the initial, will provide the greatest benefit to your organization. If we're telling criminals they don't have to talk, that they'll be held guilty, that can be held and used against them in a court of law, what you're saying in this crisis can be used against you in the court of public opinion. So you don't get to quote Calvin Coolidge very often. I remember when I went to school with Cal, as we used to call it, not the most outgoing person you would want to be, but silence can never be misquoted. If you're not saying anything, you're not making the problem worse. If you're saying the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong people, that's going to be a particular problem. So Firestorm is here to help. We have a program called Crisis Stop, and that's to help you in that critical first hour, because the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the words you say will determine, is this crisis going to stabilize or escalate? And so we have a program, and those letters STOP stand for stabilize the situation. What's occurring? What's going on? What do we need to look at? T is trigger the appropriate resources. Do you need security? Do you need counselors for your people? Have you informed your insurance carrier? Do you have your attorney involved? Opine on the exposures. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen midterm? What's going to happen long term? We find in many cases people are making decisions about things that are going to give them the bad outcome because they're talking on the wrong areas. And then finally, prevent the common crisis errors. We see mistakes, the same mistakes made over and over, and we can keep you from doing that. By the way, that first hour of crisis stop support is available to you at no cost. So we can impact the severity of the event if we put those things into place for you within your organization. There is going to be a brief about today's webinar, and you can go to firestorm.com and download that. I believe it'll be up next week so that you can have it to share with people within your organization. There'll also be a recording of today's webinar if you would like to have others listen to what we've discussed. What you're saying is important. When you say it, how you say it, to whom you say it is important. Our thanks go back out to the New Jersey MEP for underwriting and sponsoring these events. We think that this creates an excellent opportunity for you to continue to grow in your job and understandings of what's going on. You can reach us at firestorm.com. Go to our website and sign up for future webinars or access us directly. You can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. A crisis isn't business as usual. It's business as unusual. The decisions you make, the words that you say, and the actions you take will determine is it going to escalate or stabilize. So in thinking about it, slow this process down. Focus on why you're speaking. Remember that rule of 5. And if you're in trouble and there's a crisis, give us a call. Thank you for your time today, and I hope you're having a wonderful summer in your organization, and hopefully you have some vacation time left before the summer's over. Thanks, everyone. Until our webinar next month, Jim Satterfield. Have a great day. Goodbye.